nightmares don't happen in abandoned asylums or haunted forests. They happen in the places you feel safest. Your home, your commute, the streets you walk every day. In this video, I'll be sharing 3 stories from people who thought they were safe until they weren't. These stories will make you second-guess the familiar faces and quiet streets you see every day. Springfield, Missouri was supposed to be a fresh start. I was 24, and this was my first time truly living on my own. I'd moved for a new job as an administrative assistant at a local insurance firm. Steady hours, decent pay, and a chance to finally start fresh. I rented a small 1-bedroom apartment in an older brick building on the edge of downtown. It wasn't fancy, but it was affordable. A 2-story walk-up with narrow hallways, creaky floors, and big windows that let in the afternoon sun. Most of the neighbors were quiet. I didn't really know anyone well yet, but I'd nod to people in the stairwell, exchange small talk in the mailroom. There was one man I saw often. He lived down the hall from my apartment, mid-40s maybe, wiry frame, with dark hair combed flat and clothes that always looked a size too big. He'd smile whenever we passed, but something about his stare lingered a little too long. I brushed it off. New city, new apartment. Maybe I was just paranoid. One evening in late fall, I came home after a long day at work. The hallway was quiet except for the hum of the building's ancient radiator. As I unlocked my door, I felt eyes on me. I glanced down the hall, and there he was, leaning against his doorway, hands in his pockets, just watching. "Evening," he said. I smiled politely, mumbled a hello, and slipped inside. I set my purse down, kicked off my shoes, and tried to shake the feeling. A few minutes later, there was a knock at my door. When I looked through the peephole, he was standing there, still smiling. I opened the door, just a crack. "Hey," he said softly. "Sorry to bother you. I think I got some of your mail by mistake." He handed me a single envelope. It had my name on it. I thanked him and closed the door quickly. Something about the way he lingered in the hallway unsettled me. The next few days, I saw him more often, too often. He'd be in the lobby when I left for work, outside smoking when I came home. Always smiling, always polite. But there was something about his eyes, cold, calculating. Then one night, I heard a knock again. It was late, around 11 p.m. I was lying on my bed, scrolling through social media. I went to the door and checked through the peephole once more. He was looking directly at the peephole himself, with a smile on his face. I felt a chill down my spine. "Who is it?" I called through the door, not wanting to open it, and I certainly didn't want him to know I saw him with that creepy smile on. "It's me," he said casually, like we were friends. "Sorry to bother you again. Just wanted to say hi." My stomach nodded. I mustered up courage and said, "Look, I don't want to be rude, but it's late and I have a long day tomorrow. Let's talk in the morning." I was hoping he'd leave. "Come on," he said softly. "I just want to talk." I stepped back from the door, heart pounding. His tone was too casual, too confident. After a few moments of silence, I heard his footsteps retreating down the hall. I lay awake in bed for a long time after that, trying to shake off the image of him smiling and looking at the peephole as though expecting me to see him. The next day, I mentioned him to the building manager. She frowned and said he'd been living there for years, kept to himself. She promised to talk to him, but I doubted it would help. That night, I double-checked through the peephole to see if he was standing in the hallway before going to bed. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my apartment. Slow, deliberate. They stopped at my door. Then, a soft knock. "Chloe," he said. His voice was low, almost soothing. "You awake?" I froze. How did he know my name? He knocked again, more firmly. "Come on, Chloe. Open up." My heart hammered in my chest. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the dispatcher that someone was at my door and I was terrified. She kept me calm, asked for my location, and calmly gave instructions. "Stay quiet. Stay on the line. Officers are on their way." this time. "Chloe, I know you're in there." I stayed silent, clutching the phone, tears welling in my eyes. Then silence. For a moment, everything was still. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of my lock turning. The door creaked open. Had he picked the lock? I jumped up from my bed, heart hammering, and sprinted to the bedroom door. I slammed it shut and fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. The fear had held me still until that moment, but hearing my front door creak open jolted me into action. "Chloe," his voice called from the living room now, calm and casual, like this was all normal. "You don't need to be scared. I just wanted to see you." His footsteps moved closer to the bedroom. Slow, measured. I pressed myself against the bedroom door, clutching the phone, whispering updates to the dispatcher. "Stay quiet," she whispered back. "We're 2 minutes out." Then came a sound I'll never forget. A faint scraping at the door, metal on wood. My breath caught in my throat. He was trying to get in, using something he'd brought with him. Maybe he was trying to pick my bedroom door lock just like he did with my front door. I covered my mouth, tears streaming down my face, listening to him muttering to himself outside the door. I could barely hear him over my beating heart. I thought I heard faint sirens in the distance, growing louder until they wailed right outside the building. Red and blue lights flashed through the thin fabric of my bedroom curtains, bathing the room in pulses of color. Suddenly, his calm murmurs turned into a sharp, angry shout. "Stupid girl," he barked, his voice echoing through the hallway. My heart slammed against my ribs, and I pressed myself harder against the door, clutching my phone so tightly my knuckles ached. My breath came in shallow, trembling gasps as I strained and pushed against my bedroom door with all my might. Then came the sound of rushing footsteps thundering up the stairs outside my door, urgent voices cutting through the tension. I heard noises of a struggle, something heavy knocked over, followed by the scramble of boots and a chorus of barked orders. "Hands where we can see them!" "Get on the ground." I bit down on my lip to keep from making a sound, every muscle locked in terror as I listened to the chaos unfolding just feet away. I stayed frozen, clutching my phone, until there was a firm knock at my bedroom door. "Ma'am, it's safe now. We've got him." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the bedroom lock open. When I opened the door, 2 officers stood in the dim hallway, weapons drawn but lowered. My neighbor was face down in my living room, his hands cuffed behind his back. His face was pale, calm, like he'd done nothing wrong. When he saw me, he gave a faint smile and said softly, "Chloe, come on. You know me." One of the officers crouched and held up something they'd taken from him, a long kitchen knife. My stomach did another flip. That's what he'd been scraping my bedroom door with. That sound of metal against my bedroom door was him trying to get to me. The officers lifted him to his feet and walked him out, his head bowed but his expression calm, almost blank. As they passed me, he looked up with that same faint smile, whispering something I couldn't make out before they led him down the stairs and out into the flashing lights. Later that week, one of the officers who had responded to the call asked to meet with me. We sat in a quiet corner of the station while he explained what they'd found. My spare apartment key in the man's pocket, and a notebook in his apartment with my name and unit number written several times. He'd been watching me for weeks. The officer said they'd taken him in for evaluation and were pressing charges, but all I could hear was the echo of his voice outside my door that night. I broke my lease the next morning. I didn't care about the penalty or the moving fees. I couldn't spend another night there. Even now, whenever I'm in a new building, I check every lock twice. I glance over my shoulder walking down a hallway. And I'll never forget the sound of my front door creaking open in the middle of the night. I'd never lived outside the UK before. When I signed a year-long contract to teach English at a small school in southern Italy, I thought it would be an adventure, a chance to travel and experience something new. My girlfriend Keely had wanted to come with me, but she just started her residency at a hospital in London and couldn't take the time off. So instead of a romantic year abroad together, I flew out with Max, my border collie, in tow. We landed in Bari after a long day of flights and delays. The airport was crowded, the sound of rolling suitcases and chatter echoing through the terminal. Max was exhausted but wagging his tail the moment he was out of his crate, and watching him trot through the arrivals hall on his lead made me feel calmer. From Bari, a worn Fiat taxi carried us away from the city's traffic and chaos, heading south into Puglia's countryside. The road stretched endlessly, olive groves on both sides, crumbling stone walls, and the occasional weathered farmhouse. By the time we reached Carpignano Salentino, the noise of the city felt like a distant memory. The rental house waiting for us was one of those old farmhouses. 2 stories, faded white walls, wooden shutters that creaked in the wind. It sat at the end of a dusty lane, surrounded by rows of ancient olive trees. My landlord, Sergio, an older man with calloused hands and a thick accent, gave me a quick tour in broken English. A small kitchen downstairs, a bedroom upstairs, a courtyard with a rusty gate, and then handed me a single, heavy iron key. The town was small, sleepy. The first evening I walked Max through its narrow cobblestone streets. Old men played cards outside a cafe, their eyes following me with polite curiosity. At a bakery, an elderly woman smiled warmly and handed me a pastry when she saw me struggling with Italian. A teenage boy zipped by on a scooter, laughing with a friend, but not all of the looks were welcoming. A group of men outside a bar muttered something sharp as I passed. I couldn't catch the words, but the tone wasn't friendly. My days fell into a rhythm quickly. Morning walks with Max through dusty lanes lined with fig trees, teaching eager students at the school where the staff greeted me warmly despite the language barrier. Afternoons spent exploring sun-baked courtyards, tiny churches with centuries-old frescoes, and market stalls selling handmade pasta and olives. I bought a used Fiat Panda early on to get around, a little car that felt perfect for navigating Italy's narrow roads. Evenings were quiet. I'd cook simple meals, video call Keely when our schedules aligned, and sit in the courtyard with a glass of wine while Max sniffed at the wind. The sound of crickets filled the night air. One evening during my first week, I was invited to dinner at the nearest neighbor's house. A 10-minute walk down a gravel path lined with olive trees. The home belonged to an older couple, Maria and Paolo, who greeted me like family the moment I stepped through the door. The smell of simmering tomato sauce and garlic hit me instantly. We sat at a long wooden table under a single hanging light bulb, and they piled my plate with handmade orecchiette pasta, local cheeses, roasted vegetables, and bread they'd baked that morning. Paolo poured a deep red wine from a carafe he'd filled from his own barrel. Conversation was slow, my Italian was clumsy, but we managed. They asked about London, about Max, about why I'd come all the way here. As the evening wore on, Maria's warm smile faded a little when she spoke about the town. She said that 10 years ago, most families worked the olive groves, but many had left. Paolo shrugged and said, "No lavoro. No work." It wasn't just Carpignano. Even I'd read about Italy's unemployment problems before moving here, how the South was hit hardest, shops closing, families moving away. The warmth of their hospitality was undeniable, but underneath it was a heaviness, a kind of quiet resignation. Walking back to my farmhouse that night with Max trotting at my side, I was lost in thought. The dinner had been warm and welcoming, but their words about work drying up and families leaving lingered in my mind. The road was quiet, the fields stretching out in every direction, lit only by the faint glow of a distant street lamp. By the time I reached my driveway, I didn't even notice at first that the gate was wide open. I blamed the wind, closed it, and went inside. But a few nights later, Max started barking at the back fence just after sunset. His fur stood on end, and no matter how much I called to him, he wouldn't calm down. I grabbed a torch and stepped outside, but the yard was empty. No footprints, no movement, just the rustle of olive branches in the breeze. The next day, I noticed something else. 3 cigarette butts near my gate, fresh, lying in the dust. I don't smoke. Neither did Sergio, my landlord. I kicked them aside, telling myself someone had just stopped there for a break, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. There were many instances that made me uneasy. Max would stiffen during our evening walks, growling at empty stretches of road. I'd glance over my shoulder and see nothing but olive trees swaying in the wind. Some nights, I thought I heard a car slowing down near my house. By the time I got up to look through the shutters, there'd only be darkness and the sound of tires crunching gravel in the distance. One Saturday, I drove into Lecce for groceries. When I came back a few hours later, I noticed fresh boot prints in the dust near the back fence. I stood there for a while, just staring at them. They weren't mine. They weren't Sergio's, and no one had any reason to be that close to the house. I started double-locking everything at night. Windows, doors, even the gate latch. Max began sleeping upstairs with me, curled at the foot of my bed. ears twitching at every creak. It was late on Wednesday night, the next week, when it all happened. I'd just finished a lesson plan and was making tea in the kitchen downstairs when the lights flickered once, twice, then died. The house went pitch black, the kind of darkness you only get in the countryside. I felt an unease come over me. Power outages weren't common here. The silence felt wrong, deliberate. Max growled low in his throat. I grabbed my phone for light and walked to the window. Outside, the yard was still. Silent, no wind, no bugs, just an eerie, unnatural quiet. That's when I heard it. Voices, low, hushed Italian, just beyond the courtyard wall. Max started barking, loud and frantic, and I nearly dropped my phone. I snapped the light off and backed away from the window, my heart pounding. The voices grew louder, closer. I could hear the crunch of boots on gravel, slow and deliberate, circling the house like predators sizing up their prey. Then came a soft rattle at the back door handle, followed by a faint metallic scraping, someone working at the lock with a tool. Max barked furiously, his growls echoing through the farmhouse, but it didn't seem to matter. The men were laughing softly, trading comments in Italian, their voices casual, almost cheerful, as if this was a game to them. One of them whistled low, another let out a chuckle. It felt wrong, like they wanted me to know they were there. Footsteps crunched against gravel again, moving around the side of the house. Max's barking only grew more frantic, but the men didn't stop. If anything, their voices got louder, closer, and more confident, like they had all the time in the world. The sound of scraping metal against glass made my stomach clench. They weren't in a hurry. They weren't afraid. They were toying with me. Then came a sharp, splintering crack. The small window in the back door shattered inward, glass raining onto the tiled floor. I held my breath as a man's gloved hand reached through the jagged opening, fumbling for the lock. Max exploded into motion. With a snarl I'd never heard from him before, he lunged and clamped down hard on the intruder's wrist. The man let out a raw, guttural scream that echoed through the courtyard, his flashlight clattering to the ground outside. I grabbed the closest thing I could, a heavy kitchen knife, and shouted, voice shaking but loud, "Ho un'arma, vado ad usarla. I have a weapon, I'll use it." Another voice barked something urgent in Italian from outside, panicked. Max held on tight, his teeth sunk deep as the man thrashed, screaming and swearing. Finally, the hand ripped free, leaving a streak of blood on the doorframe. There was chaos outside now, hurried footsteps, someone yelling, "Prendi lui, take him." The men were rethinking everything, then came retreat. Boots scrambled over gravel, a car door slammed, and just like that, they were gone. Needless to say, I couldn't sleep a wink the entire night after that. I sat on the floor of my kitchen with Max pressed against me, flinching at every creak of the old farmhouse. I clutched onto that kitchen knife until the first light of dawn finally crept through the shutters. As soon as the sun was up, I called Sergio. Sergio drove over within minutes of my call, and we examined the damage together. Fresh footprints in the dust, droplets of blood on the gravel and door frame, and deep scratches on the back door as though made with some sharp tool, probably the same they used to break the glass. Sergio muttered a curse under his breath and immediately called the police. 2 officers showed up less than an hour later, one older, one younger. Their eyes widened slightly at the bloodstains near the door, still dark and glistening in places. "Uno di loro è ferito," the younger officer said quietly. "One of them is injured." I showed them Max's blood-stained muzzle in the shattered window. The officers exchanged a look, then started taking photos. They asked me to recount everything, scribbling notes. I explained in broken Italian and English, the hand reaching in, Max attacking, the screams, the shouting. "Probably ragazzi," the older one said with a shrug. "Teenagers." I stared at him in disbelief. "Teenagers don't cut power and come with tools," I snapped, my voice trembling with anger. "Look at the blood. Someone was hurt trying to break in." He just scribbled something in a notebook and told me to keep my doors locked. The younger officer gave Max, who was still pacing and bristling, a sympathetic glance. They left after 20 minutes. No fingerprinting, no extra patrols promised. Just a quick warning to be careful. As their car disappeared down the dusty road, frustration boiled in my chest. They'd seen the blood, the shattered glass, the footprints, yet it felt like they were dismissing me as paranoid. I was left standing there, unprotected and unheard, with nothing but Max and locked doors between me and whoever had tried to get in. That evening, Maria and Paolo invited me over. Their home was warm and bright. They sat me down at their kitchen table, poured me a coffee, and packed a basket with fresh bread, tomatoes, and a bottle of their olive oil. "You should not live alone out here," Maria said quietly in Italian. "Troppo isolato." Too isolated. voice low. People watch. They know when a house is empty. They know when a Storniero lives here. A foreigner. The warmth of their home should have been comforting, but their words left me uneasy. Out here, in the olive groves, everyone noticed everything. And yet, I suddenly felt like I was the one being watched. That night, I barricaded the back door with a chair and left every light on. Max slept by the bedroom window, growling softly at the sound of rustling olive branches. I didn't sleep much in the days after that. Even with Max curled up next to me, every sound outside made my skin crawl. I stopped leaving the house after sunset and kept the shutters closed at all times. By the end of the week, I told Sergio I couldn't stay. He didn't argue. He just nodded, as if he'd seen this before, and helped me find a small apartment in Lecce, closer to people, closer to noise. Moving day was quick. I loaded the Panda with bags and boxes, Max jumping nervously in and out of the back seat as I locked the farmhouse door for the last time. The olive groves were quiet, the road empty. Halfway to Lecce, I let myself breathe for the first time in days. The city traffic felt like a comfort. Honking horns, scooters weaving through cars, the distant hum of voices. I didn't tell Keely until after I'd settled into the apartment a week later. She'd been working 12-hour shifts, and I didn't want to worry her until I was somewhere safe. She was relieved I'd left, but I could hear the tension in her voice. A week later, I drove back to Carpignano for some mail that had been delivered to the old address. The afternoon sun beat down on the empty farmhouse, its shutters closed tight. I pulled up quickly, grabbed the envelope from Sergio, and was about to leave when I noticed a dark blue hatchback parked a little way down the road. There was a young man who seemed to be in his mid-20s standing outside the car and leaning against the driver's side door, smoking. He didn't look at me, didn't wave, just flicked the cigarette onto the gravel and got back in his car. As the driver slid into the seat, I saw him glance at the passenger next to him, a man cradling a heavily bandaged hand. I drove off as quickly as I could, and as I did, he pulled out behind me and followed for several miles before finally turning down another road. I told myself it was a coincidence, that I was imagining things, but every time I walk Max late at night now, even in the busy streets of Lecce, I feel the same thing I felt out there in the olive groves. Like someone is watching me. I'd always dreamed of having a place to myself. After years of cramped apartments, bad roommates, and a breakup that left me feeling suffocated, I finally left Seattle and moved to Yakima, a quiet, small city most people only pass through. Seattle had been my entire world. I'd grown up there, gone to college there, and spent my 20s in a tiny studio apartment with paper-thin walls and traffic that never stopped, day or night. Even working remotely as a freelance copywriter didn't help. I was still surrounded by chaos, neighbors arguing, sirens wailing, the constant rumble of buses below my window. It was exhausting. I wanted distance, a fresh start, somewhere cheap and quiet, far from the relentless hum of the city I'd called home my whole life. Yakima was nothing like Seattle. The pace was slower, the air felt cleaner, and for the first time in years, I could stand outside and hear nothing but wind and the occasional barking dog down the block. The house I found was old but charming, faded yellow siding, a crooked fence, and a driveway split with weeds. The rent was suspiciously low, but I didn't care. All I wanted was space, silence, privacy. Settling in was easy. I furnished the living room with second-hand pieces, set up my little desk by the window, and made it feel like home. My days became simple and predictable. Wake up early, brew a strong cup of coffee, open my laptop, and spend the day drafting ads and product descriptions for clients scattered across the country. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and soft jazz playing from my phone. Evenings were peaceful walks through empty streets or phone calls with my sister back in Seattle, letting her know I was fine. I'd text my old friends, scroll through their photos of bars and parties, and smile to myself. For the first time, I didn't miss the noise. I didn't miss the chaos. For a few weeks, I was genuinely happy. Then the silence stopped feeling peaceful. It started to feel watchful. The first sign was scratching in the walls at night. The first time I heard it, I barely reacted. Old house, I told myself. Probably mice. I left a podcast running to drown it out and went to sleep. The next night, it happened again. Louder. Closer, I called pest control the next day. They inspected the place from attic to basement but found nothing. No droppings. No holes, no sign of mice. They told me it was probably just an old house settling. I wanted to believe them, but then came the whispers. I first heard them late one night, lying in bed. At first I thought it was the wind through the old vents, but the sound was too soft, too intentional. I lay still, straining to hear. It was a man's voice, muffled, low. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like he was speaking to someone. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe I'd left a podcast playing on my phone, but the whispers didn't stop. And sometimes, I swore I heard my name. I'd be brushing my teeth, and from the hallway vent, a faint whisper, Marissa. My stomach would twist. I'd turn around sharply, heart pounding, but the hallway was always empty. Soon, I started noticing other things. The air in the house felt heavy, damp, even when the heat was off. I'd leave a mug on the coffee table and come back to find it slightly moved. I told myself I was tired, paranoid. Working alone all day was messing with my head. One night, I decided to try something. I don't even know why. I'd seen it in a movie once. I propped my phone on the dresser, plugged it in so it wouldn't die, cleared out as much storage as I could, switched on the camera app, scrolled to video mode and hit record. I knew it wouldn't last the whole night. Phones overheat, storage runs out, but I figured if anything happened, I'd catch it. The next morning, I found a storage warning on my screen. The recording had stopped overnight. When I checked the file, it was just over 3 hours long, meaning it had stopped around 1:15 a.m. I pressed play. For almost the entire video, the footage showed me sleeping peacefully, nothing unusual. Then, just a few minutes before the video cut off, a voice, clear, low.
Marissa, I am here.
I froze. My heart was pounding, even though I was safe in daylight. I replayed that part over and over, praying I'd misheard. But I hadn't. There was a man's voice in my bedroom calling my name. I called my landlord. I didn't mention the recording, just asked if anyone had ever lived there before me. There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, he sighed and said, that place was empty for a long time. When I pressed him, he admitted there had been an incident. A man had killed his wife in that house 30 years ago, and then himself. The house had sat vacant for over a decade, and tenants would not stay more than a few months at a stretch. They always made an excuse and leave. I hung up and immediately called my sister. She still lived in Seattle, but she didn't hesitate. She drove over that afternoon, and together we packed up everything I owned. By the end of the week, I'd signed a lease for a small apartment back in Seattle. Enough experimenting with peace and quiet, I thought. I just wanted familiar streets, busy neighbors, and city noise outside my window again. Until later that same night. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard it. A whisper from my closet.
Marissa.
I froze, staring at the door. Then came the softest laugh from inside my closet.